Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris Hayden. I'm a producer here at Fierce, and today I'm joined by Tom Murtagh. Tom is the Global Practice Lead and Strategy and Insight at Lumanity. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
All right. And thank you for joining us today, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'd love it if you could just tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Local Bostonian, and have been working with the biotech and industry prior to it being the biotech industry, probably since the early 90s.
Wow.
Here outside of Boston, always in a role of providing services and support to companies that are on the path to innovation.
Sure, sure. Well, speaking of innovation, I'd love it if you could kind of set the stage for us by describing how you see the industry evolving and where you see and where your team
Sure.
and I guess your company also is focused on driving this innovation.
Yeah, I think we find ourselves in sort of very interesting times. On the one hand, we are clearly seeing an abundance of riches and wealth from a discovery perspective, and from a pipeline, sort of unprecedented kind of ingenious invention on the side of science, right? So years, over the last 10 or 12 years, we always thought we had a sense of biology and biologic understanding. I think we understood to some extent what drugs were doing, but not necessarily the entire system. And now I think what we're seeing is a much more systemic view. And as a result, some incredibly creative approaches to treating disease and actually eliminating disease and potentially even preventing disease. So on the one hand, we're seeing this tremendous potential, an abundance of approaches. And yet on the other side, we're seeing a system that is increasingly taxed with respect to being able to pay for the innovation, right? With being able to prioritize and understand the innovation and its impact on health, and also a system that has struggled to innovate itself in terms of what it takes to get a product to market. So increasingly more precise and narrow therapies, right, that are designed for specific populations, which are great because we have a sense then for the fit for purpose and the fact that they'll work. But the economics and timing associated with drug development and that whole process and the regulatory side really haven't changed.
Right. Yeah.
So what we're seeing is sort of kind of this increasingly binary set of outcomes, right? Where, in the past, if you developed a therapy and it was registered, you had some ability to sort of bring it to market and secure some part of a market. With all those, both the opportunity set and then the constraints, what we're seeing is just being successful doesn't equate to being successful in being able to get to market doesn't equate to actually having the product embraced in any way, shape, or form, right? So we're seeing a bit more of the binary, either you're winning or you're really not being taken up by the market at all,
right?
Which presents some real difficulties from an investor perspective and from a commercialization decision-making perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. In your latest white paper there at Lumanity, you talk about value and inflection points, which is a great term in medicine development. Can you walk us through what those are and why they matter so much for commercial success?
Yeah. I think, we've been building at Lumanity a team that's very much designed to bring deep scientific expertise and appreciation for sort of clinical practice, and then experts in the field of evidence and evidence engineering, right? The development of evidence required to change systems. So we brought those capabilities together, and we brought them together in a way where we've done the hard work in figuring out how to enable different capabilities to really work together, and that's always been a difficult thing for our industry or any industry to do, is sort of break through the silos. And we've been focused on bringing those together and enabling them to work. The concept of the inflection points at Lumanity is that, there are a few moments in particular that matter a lot in terms of ability to shape the trajectory of an asset and get it right.
Right.
Early on, it's the sense of developing a value proposition from the earliest days and really understanding and doing the hard work to figure out what we think the threshold is for a scientific innovation to matter.
Okay.
And it's assembling those capabilities around the table. And these are capabilities that at times find it very hard to talk to each other, right?
Right.
From the folks who understand the science and the risks and the likelihood of success to the folks who understand the economics of the system. Those are very different languages, right?
Yes.
Shaping the asset is sort of, is that it's probably a series of moments, but once there's some evidence, right, that we have activity against the biological target, configuring the asset in a way that it really deliver the value that's required to move the system is that second inflection point. And there's a lot of work that goes on to really think about the trade-offs in terms of moving beyond just a regulatory package, but moving to a package of evidence that's going to actually move the market. And then in our current environment with as many novel and interesting and fundamentally groundbreaking therapies, right? So things like cell therapy or genetic therapies, and there's that moment in figuring out how you bring the product to market and how you engage with the real world in a way that has never really been defined before. And it's walking away from the classic sort of old playbook, but figuring out where and how to make investments that will deliver, again, the evidence and the value and in a convincing way to folks who are making decisions. And so, we built a team that's assembled to really try to focus on those moments, recognizing that there aren't easy answers at any of those moments, right? There's a series of trade-offs. There's a series of assumptions that management teams find, very challenging to understand and weigh. And that's what we built our team to try to really elucidate those trade-offs, to highlight the risks, to surface the assumption set, really to give clarity to, in order to achieve this, one has to believe these things. But then how do you systematically build the evidence and sort of, either understand that your thesis is correct or decide you've got to walk away.
Right. And that's a hard thing to do.
It is. It's a very hard thing to do. But increasingly, what we're finding with the 0 and 1 binary outcomes, right? There's a lot of folks who, are beginning to taste the unfortunate impact of not walking away or not sticking, and being, more rigorous with some of the early stage decision making.
Yeah. And you're just at that point, you're just dragging it along. So.
Right.
So that's interesting. So, many commercialization efforts falter. Like we kind of talked about this a little bit. Falter because functional teams operate in silos. So what practical steps can leaders take to foster integration between commercial, clinical, regulatory, and medical affairs teams?
Yeah, it's
the crux of the conversation.
It really is.
Yeah.
As someone now who's looking backwards and having been thinking about this for a lot of years, this is not a new discussion.
Right, 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. This is the ongoing discussion. I think what has made it harder is what I've just referenced earlier, which is these decisions are more complicated. There's more. A few years ago, 7 years ago, right? One might be able to define one's competitive set by looking at, a particular small molecule mechanism of action and saying, okay, I know my competitive set, right? But today when you're looking at, all kinds of different interventions, whether they're RNAi-based or cell therapy in the immune space, right? We've got all these different modalities that make these decisions much harder because you're not, your competitive set is even harder to just even understand and sort of figure out what's in scope. And so, we find that in order to make sense of that world, what you really need is meaningful exchange. And meaningful exchange requires time and space.
Yeah.
And, I think what we've been seeing, in teams and organizations that are best able to break down those barriers, is that they go beyond the classic sort of approach to program management and effective project management, which don't get me wrong, it's essential and it's an underpinning and one needs it. But a lot of times solving complex problems becomes a reductionist exercise where you break things up and allocate them to individual pieces and functions to go solve and then come back and assemble them.
Yes, exactly.
And that misses a bit of the point that these problems require the exchange and exploration, right? They aren't solvable in small pieces.
Right.
I think, there are still work that everybody has to do in terms of homework. But it's really the teams that are able to create that space to have the meaningful exchanges. So when the folks are talking about the approach to science and its risks and what it would take, there's an understanding on the other side of the table, right? We're not trying to create equal scientists, but we are trying to create folks who have a deeper appreciation for the risk, the time, the investment required to make those. And on the flip side, right, it's the scientists understanding why some of what we're talking, some of what is articulated as endpoints or new thresholds, right, to deliver clinical impact are so important. And it's only through that exchange. So the teams that have been doing the best job sort of create that innovation space, that learning space. And at times it's messy. And it feels like it gets in the way of effective program management and process, but it's exactly what teams need to come to the right answer.
It's interesting. I've been sitting in this chair talking to a lot of people. Everybody's mentioning AI and technology, but at the end of the day, it's simple. Human communication is still paramount.
It is.
Yeah.
And we've been talking within our own organization about the role of AI and I'll leave to the side sort of the role it plays in the biological understanding. That's somebody else's domain. But within our organization, I think we've come to appreciate that there can be great efficiencies gained,
right?
And there can be new ways of interrogating and even interacting with data.
Yes.
But it still requires the expert guidance around it, right? AI can be overwhelming even in times in terms of what it could surface as hypotheses and connections and data. But at the end of the day, there's an expert element, an experience component to it. Because at the end, these are not purely formulaic decisions, right? These are decisions. Any decision is, the easy ones are the ones where there's an empirical answer, right? But most of these, most decisions are a function of what an organization's priorities are,
I was thinking that,
right? And there's a question of sort of understanding the organization's priorities, its risk tolerance, right? It could be time. It could be it could be size of result, right? It could be there are many others, but understanding that relative to the opportunity set is what's particularly important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's interesting. So, I hate to do it. We keep jumping on our next question here, but advanced technologies like AI, if you've ever heard of it, and predictive analytics transforming decision making. So, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for these tools in accelerating market access and patient impact, if beyond what we were talking earlier?
Yeah, I think as a service organization, I think we're seeing tremendous, efficiencies, and there's a series of layers. Is I think the way we're seeing this. There's an efficiency layer in terms of AI making certain tasks that required human labor to just parse and provide it levels of analysis. And we're seeing AI accelerate that and give more time and space to really the interpretation. That's exciting. I've mentioned earlier, we're also beginning to see how AI and AI tools allow us to interact with data differently. So the notion of conducting research, market research, and intelligence gathering, and looking at that as an observation, as opposed to being able to interact with it, right. Is sort of a new domain. So, we're experimenting with how do you take research and research outputs and create the interactive model, right, that allows you to not just look at things through the lens of a report, but really to live the experience and to interact with the data set as
Right.
though it were alive, which is quite different.
Yeah.
Gives you a much more holistic view. I think we're also seeing advances that are quite material in terms of the patient finding world, which increasingly this has become
Yeah.
a very important competitive dynamic.
Yeah.
Right? It's not really, we're not we're talking about ensuring that there's access to the right patients in a system that is really been flooded with many options.
Right.
And so increasingly sort of finding the right patient at the right time is also quite exciting, in terms of AI yield.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. I mean, yeah, that's a huge.
Yep. Yep.
I believe there are conferences about that.
Yeah, exactly.
So my last question, everybody's leaving here Thursday afternoon, going back home, going back to their offices. If you had a piece of advice or an insight that you'd like to leave with these
Sure.
people as they leave, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it dovetails nicely with some of what we've talked about a bit already. It's the notion that success is really built from the earliest days in terms of a clarity of a value proposition for an asset. Gone are the days where it's the build it, they will come kind of mindset.
Yep.
And it's really doing the hard, very uncomfortable work as early as possible to gain clarity around why a therapy is going to matter and exactly what it will need to look like in order to move the system. Because the systems need to be moved, right, in this world. And I would say, stay very focused early on that and really understand the evidence and the full evidence package that's required to move the system. Ensure that the evidence generation plan is not appended on top of the registrational plan, but it's really a core construct throughout the asset that's developed alongside the asset itself. And then, part C, I guess, would be to just stay ruthlessly focused on what you set as the challenge for the asset, and don't fall victim to the sliding scale as
shiny object.
Yeah. Well, and as the asset evolves, it's staying disciplined to what you set as the goal from the beginning.
Yeah.
Those are kind of my few thoughts.
I love it. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.